Hello and welcome to the Real Talk podcast with Kelly and Avery. We're your hosts, Kelly Berger and Avery Roberts. We are two rare ladies living with congenital muscular dystrophy, CMD.
The show where we amplify voices, break down barriers, and celebrate the power of disability identity. Whether you're living with a disability, supporting someone who is, or just here to learn, you're in the right place.
Where wit, wisdom, and reels are all part of the party. So sit down with us. We're tearing down stereotypes, one reel at a time.
It's a front row seat to bold conversations and the thriving disabled lifestyle, and we're ready to get gloriously uncomfortable.
Let's get loud, proud, and empowered. Real power, real stories.
This episode is a really special one for me personally. We're talking about disability representation on Broadway, not just as an abstract concept, but as lived experience, industry change, and just pure artistry. I'm a professional dancer in the industry, and it has shaped my life truly, especially my understanding of storytelling, especially having lived in New York my whole life. Broadway is probably my all-time favorite thing, like just ask Kelly. Especially just having friends who have been on Broadway or who are currently on Broadway, being able to experience the magic from so many different angles, and then also being in the industry personally. This episode I'm just truly so excited about. For a long time, Broadway has been held up as a cultural mirror in a way. It shows us who matters, who's worthy of being seen, and who gets to take up space on the, biggest stages in the world. Which brings us to today's guest, someone who has not only taken up space on Broadway, but who has truly changed it. We're beyond grateful, truly, to be joined by Jenna Bainbridge. Jenna, thank you for taking time out of your crazy busy schedule to be here. I don't say this lightly when I say you're someone I truly admire, both as an artist and as an advocate. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Kelly and Avery. I'm just so pumped to talk about access and inclusion. It's such an important part of the industry that I think we don't always get to talk about.
Yeah, completely agree. So Jenna, we want to start here. When was the first time you saw disability represented on stage? And did it feel authentic to you?
Yeah, so I count myself very lucky because I grew up in Denver. And in Denver, we have a theater company called Family Theater Company, PHAMALY, and they hire entirely actors with disabilities. So the entire cast of any show you see at Family is disabled. And so I saw Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat there when I was 11. And it was the first time that I had seen any disabled performer. I had never seen a disabled performer in a movie, on TV. I mean, that still feels incredibly rare. But especially as a kid, it was the best representation I can remember in my childhood was the movie A Very Long Engagement, which I think it's Audrey Tautou. Is that who it is? But she pretends to have a disability and she walked very similar to how I walk. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in a movie. And it was so much better to see something like Joseph and see so many different types of disabilities and a show that was equally centering disability and also not talking about it and normalizing it, because it wasn't we're not talking about disability in Joseph. It's just that disability is present and disability is advocated for, and the whole show is accessible. So it was the best experience I could have as an 11-year-old kid. And I then got to work with them for many years, but Denver has great representation, and I feel so lucky to have grown up.
That's amazing. So you want to talk a little bit about setting the stage. You touched somewhat on this about disability representation in theater, how it's been historically absent, stereotyped, or played by non-disabled actors. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, disability for a very long time, and still to this day, is often portrayed by non-disabled people on all sides, right? Disabled characters are written by non-disabled people frequently who don't have any lived experience and therefore are writing from a place of what they imagine it would feel like to have a disability. Oftentimes that removes a lot of the actual lived experience, but also like I often find that these characters are written in a way that like removes the joy of the disabled experience and focuses on like the non-disabled impression of like what is taken from you when you become disabled. And like that has never been my experience. I don't feel that my disability has taken anything from me. I actually feel that the most disabling thing about my disability is society, is the world. It's the fact that the world isn't accessible. It's not my disability that's a problem. It's lack of accessibility that's a problem. And a lot of the disabled characters that we have in our canon don't have that lens. It's a very different interpretation. And then that is further compounded by the fact that then they are portrayed by non-disabled actors who are also imagining what it feels like to have a disability. And it perpetuates stereotypes and stigmas about disability that I don't find to be true. And that then is also some of the first examples people have of what it means to be disabled when they themselves have a disability or acquire a disability. It perpetuates these really negative stereotypes. And I think it does great harm when we don't have authentic representation, because when people are able to share their own stories on these big global stages or TV shows or movies, it can help to rewrite that narrative in a really important, powerful way that empowers people when they then become disabled, or if they've had a disability their whole lives, they can see possibilities for themselves in the stories we tell. And those stories deserve to be positive.
Right. It's those narratives that are wrongfully out there that are tragedy only or just
Mm-hmm.
for inspiration. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely want to.
And it makes it feel like disability is this like rare thing. Disabled characters only represent like something like 1% of characters on TV. And people with disabilities are 20% of the population. This is a massive community, and we're being so underrepresented on TV. And that's even rarer on stage. We really don't have very much disabled representation on stage. So it makes it seem like it's this like incredibly rare experience that no one will ever come across. And it's like, no, babe, like you know somebody who's disabled, you either are disabled or will become disabled at some point. Like this is a natural part of life, and like that's not a bad thing to talk about.
Preach.
I know.
I
Love
know I'm
it.
like preaching to the choir here. We're all like, yeah, yeah.
Broadway hasn't always been welcoming to disabled artists, but we are seeing shifts, although they, are small, at least to us. And your career is a huge part of that story. You've broken barriers in ways that didn't exist before you. Um, Originating roles, stepping into legacy roles, and doing so without your disability being treated as a limitation or even like a metaphor.
Mhm.
What did it mean to you personally and professionally to originate a role in Suffs as a wheelchair user?
Suffs, I can't even begin to explain how incredible that experience was. The company was just the best group of humans on the planet, and everyone really gave a shit about telling a good story and telling it in an empowering way for everybody involved. So that doesn't happen all the time. We have like lightning in a bottle of just like really incredibly talented humans who also cared. So Suffs getting to originate a role is one of those like bucket list items, I think, for any actor. So for that to be my Broadway debut was just wild. But what it also meant for me was that it was laying the groundwork for expectations that Suffs is a story that includes disabled voices. And that is something that we have never had before in the American theater canon. We don't have disabled actors originating roles, so that we all know that like when shows leave Broadway and start being in schools, start being in regional productions, we all have an idea of what that show is. We have an idea of who belongs in that show, of what casting might look like. And now there's a framework with that show that disabled people are part of it. There is a track in that show that was built to be accessible. My track was built for me and my disability. And it was also kept open. the track was incredibly fluid, and really we had accessibility built into the track itself. So that if I was having a day where I felt like I needed to use my wheelchair more, I had that ability. Every single part that I did in that show was built in a way that, like, if my body needed something different on any given day, I could change my track, which is like not something that happens very often on Broadway.
Yeah, for sure.
Or really anywhere, right? But it was built in that, like, great. Yeah, these characters walk because I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user. I use a wheelchair, but I also walk. And I had two of my characters that walked for their character. And I could use my wheelchair for any one of them at any time. The entire track was kept totally open and accessible. We had blocking in place that, like, I could be seated and not be blocked by other performers or by set pieces. Like, it was really open to that. So that also means that it's open to all kinds of disabilities. It's just like a very accessible track within this show. And I think that it makes people imagine disability in any of the roles. Every single role within that show is open to cast the right person. It's not so constrained by, like, who played this part originally? Oh, she was brunette. Guess we better cast a brunette. Like, that's not a thing in Suffs. Suffs is super open in the way it's cast. And I think that having disability representation from the onset means that will continue to be perpetuated in subsequent productions, or I hope it means that. And that's a really exciting thing that we now have.
Yeah, for sure. That's incredible. And I think, like you said, like, it's huge, and I'm sure really fulfilling for you to know that what you have created is going to be what other people get to experience as well. Like, all the, joy and access that you had experienced is now just, permanently in that track, which, like you said, you don't see on Broadway often. So that's amazing. And these moments matter so much. They impact hiring practices, creative teams, and how, other fellow disabled performers, or even, young disabled performers, imagine their futures. And then also they matter for audiences, because seeing disabled artists, on stage isn't just representation, it's also changing and shifting perspectives and misconceptions.
Suffs is a great example of that too, because I think that people look at the show, it's like, oh my gosh, it takes place in 1920.
Right.
Disabled people didn't exist then.
Yeah.
Like, it's just this, like, no, we've always existed. And just because a show takes place in a time period where you haven't seen that representation doesn't mean you can't include it now. Doesn't mean that we can't really show, like, what does American womanhood look like at this time. We can put into any story. And I think that that's really important too. It's just because, like, your impression of what a time period is or what a story is, you can still cast it in a diverse and inclusive manner.
Yeah, for sure. And then also, what was also incredible is after making your Broadway debut, you shifted over to Wicked, which was, I remember the day I found out that you were going to Wicked and becoming the first wheelchair user to play Nessarose, which, if people don't know, which I feel like, Wicked is having a moment right now. So it's incredible that you're a part of that history. Not only Marissa Bodie, being in the movie, but now you're able to make that history, on stage where Wicked actually originated. So, to me, it's crazy that it took them like 20-ish years to get you here, to get someone like us, on that stage in that role. But stepping into Wicked, a show with such, a massive cultural footprint, especially right now, how did that moment land for you? Like, take us back. I want to hear it all.
So I think I can take it back to, like, my audition, really.
Yeah.
So I was doing Suffs, and we knew that we were closing. We knew that we would be closing in January. And this was back in October. And so I went to my manager and was like, hey, I'm not going to have a job in January. So, like, let's start, like, really reaching out and, auditioning. And the movie was, of course, like, overdrive for advertisements at the moment. So, like, I was seeing Marissa Bodie's face everywhere.
Yeah.
And I was so
I think
excited.
we all were.
Yes.
Yeah.
And every single time I was like, yes, finally we're having, like, this incredible disability representation. And I was like, I want to see if Broadway will see me. Like, I know that all of the old Broadway theaters are incredibly inaccessible. Every single theater on Broadway was built before the passage of the ADA. And many of the theaters were built in like the 1920s. They're really inaccessible places because they're also, a lot of them are historical landmarks. So there's just lots of reasons why they continue to be inaccessible. And a lot of people don't realize that backstage spaces are also not completely protected by the ADA, just because they are like private areas for employees, not public facing. And the ADA is for like public facing spaces. So, it means that these spaces are really inaccessible. And so I went to my manager and was like, hey, I'd love to be seen for Wicked. And she got me an audition within it was like 48 hours. She was like, hey,
Oh,
by the way,
wow.
yeah, it turns out they're having auditions right now and they'll see you.
It
It was like next
Oh my
week.
God.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like total
Magic.
kismet. Yeah. So I went and had an audition in person. It went well, but I didn't hear anything for a few weeks. Then I came back in for a second audition. So my second and final audition was the end of October. And then I didn't hear anything for
It's
months.
the waiting game. I know.
Wow.
Yeah. So we get to the beginning of December. I get an email asking me to like come and see the show and take a tour of backstage. And it was incredible because Wicked told me ahead of time. They said, our building is very old, and also we've had a show running in it consistently for 22 years. And, when shows are running, you're not able to like change things backstage.
Update it. Right.
Yeah, because we run 6 days a week. You only have 1 day a week where there's not people actively working. We don't close down for vacations. We don't close down for, Broadway is always going. So any kind of renovation has to happen like while shows are happening. We recently changed out all of the lights in Wicked to LEDs,
wow.
and it happened
Wow.
while we were performing, while we were actively performing. The crew would
That's
come in during the
insane.
day and change out like all of the lights in one section. And then that night we would just have LEDs on us in that section. But like the other section would still be the old incandescent bulbs.
Right.
Like they update, it
That's
took
wild.
months. It was like 4 months of them
Wow.
updating these bulbs like one at a time. And, people seeing the show during those few months, like you had this mix of like the old and the new. That's how renovations generally happen on Broadway, is like while it's still running. So they told me, they were like, hey, the building is old. Here's the realities of like what the space looks like. And we're going to walk through it together and just talk through like what is a reasonable accommodation? What are the realities of like, what can I do as a human in the workplace, and what can the building do to like kind of meet me where I'm at? And we just had a really open discussion about what was possible, and they were so willing to adjust things. Like immediately they
Wow.
were like, we can move your dressing room so that it's somewhere closer. And it meant that, not only did my dressing room move, because originally Nessa's dressing room is like upstairs. So they moved me downstairs into what was Madame Morrible's dressing room. But then she had to move
Oh.
into what was Fiero's dressing room, because they're also not going to make Madame Morrible walk up the stairs. And they
It's
moved
like a
Fiero
puzzle.
upstairs.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not as simple as like, we moved my dressing room. It was like, no. What was it? It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 actors had their dressing rooms moved because of like just having to move me down 1 floor. And our dressers then had to move
Oh
because
yeah. Yeah.
every single one of those actors has dressers helping them to like get in and out of their costumes and running and
Quick
resetting costumes, right? So
changes.
it's,
Yeah.
the choreography backstage is just as intricate
It's
as the
yeah.
choreography on stage.
It's not talked about enough, for sure.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of things. It's not just as simple as like, oh, we moved. It was like, no. Everybody agreed that this was
Pick
worth
up
it.
your shit. We're moving.
That's a
Yeah.
puzzle piece.
Yeah, it was huge. So, they were able to do that. I had some of my blocking shifted to be a little more accessible for me. There was a lot of changes that they made, and they were so incredible and really open to talking about like what is actually possible. And I just had the greatest time at Wicked, and now being able to like tell that story every night too, and showing people the full spectrum of like what it means to be a wheelchair user too, because I think that's also been part of the impression of Nessarose is, well, she has to walk. Like the character, like the track requires, the storytelling requires that Nessarose walks. And I think a lot of people thought like, oh, well, they can't cast a wheelchair user because wheelchair users can't walk. And that's obviously not the case. I read a statistic recently that the majority of wheelchair users are able to walk or stand in some capacity. But most people don't know that. They don't think that. That's not the
Right.
impression that media has also perpetuated over the years. And so when I came into Wicked, I did it as part of my audition. I
Oh, I love it.
during the audition stood up out of my wheelchair, and then I finished by being like, great, so if you have any questions about my disability, about accommodation, like I want to have those conversations. And it
Yep.
opened the door that we were actually able to discuss pretty openly like what the realities were about what was required for the role, but also what was required for the building, and made something that really worked.
Yeah. Wow. Can you talk about curtain call? I've heard you talk about it
Mhm.
before, how they switched that moment and that blocking. Can you talk about it a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah, so curtain call, the way that it was originally blocked is every principal actor comes out and like has a bow, either individually or with their like counterpart. And curtain calls are timed to music. So like you only have X amount of time to come like running out from the wing, because you don't want to be like running out until the previous person has finished their bow, right? Because it's
Yeah.
like
You don't want to
you don't
take
want to be
their
like
moment.
standing behind them. Exactly. Like everybody gets their moment. So
Yeah.
it is like really, really tightly timed. And I'm sure that like there was other solutions, but I looked at it and was like, hey, that timing is not going to work for me walking. So like as an accommodation, I can do that if I'm using my wheelchair. Like I can go that fast if I can use my wheelchair. And I think it's really important to show the audience that I am a wheelchair user. A lot of them aren't going to know that unless they're reading the bios. Like they're not really going to know if I'm disabled or not. Right.
Right.
So I was like, I
Yeah.
want to show them like me in my modern wheelchair, to show like, hey, I am a disabled person. I identify as disabled. And like, here I am separate from the character, because curtain call is also when we like kind of remove the character and we just come out as ourselves.
Yeah.
So like Dr. Dillamond, who wears a goat mask for the entire show, like he comes out holding the mask in front of him. Right. And I was like, I kind of want to do that same thing, but like with my disability.
Yeah.
Like I am no longer using the show wheelchairs. I'm using my wheelchairs. I'm showing me as a disabled
Right.
person. And that was really important for me to show the audience like, hey, I'm a part of this community. And I also wanted to show the audience a different type of wheelchair, because
Yeah.
the wheelchairs in the show they're really big, they're kind of clunky, they're really hard to move in. And I was like, I want to show them a modern wheelchair. I want to show people like how easy it is for me to move in my wheelchair, and how far accessibility devices have really come. And so every single person across the board was like, yep, absolutely. We're going to build your wheelchair into curtain call, because that's important not only for my mobility and my access needs, but also for storytelling about inclusion.
Yeah. Of course.
So you talked a little bit earlier about access and how there's still a lot of barriers. Where are some places or theaters, other theaters or productions that are doing it right? Like who's doing it well that you would want to shout out or highlight that you think is making progress for us in the space?
On Broadway or
Yeah.
generally? I mean, Broadway's hard. I did a lot of research into like, all right, who is currently on Broadway and identifies as disabled? And like, it's harder to find that information about backstage, about like stage managers, stage hands, crew members. It's hard to find that information because it's not quite as public. But with actors, I was only able to find, I think it was 8 actors this year on Broadway.
Did your name come up all the time?
Yeah, my name definitely came up. Wait, let me pull up because I think it's important to say,
Yes.
who
Shout them
the other
out.
people were. Waiting for Godot was like incredible, and we had Michael Patrick Thornton in that show. What I loved about Waiting for Godot is that the character of Lucky is not written to have a disability.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just great inclusive casting for like storytelling, because that character had so much more depth and these really interesting levels. And like it was just such an exciting revelation to see
Right.
Michael Patrick Thornton in that show. We also had Liam Pierce in Anne Juliet.
Yeah.
He was
Exactly.
originally in How to Dance in Ohio. That was his Broadway debut, and now he's in Anne Juliet. Ayanna Nicole Thompson. Ayanna Nicole Thomas was also in How to Dance in Ohio. She's now over at Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, or she was in 2025. Her run just ended.
Yeah.
We've got Nicholas Perron was in Ragtime.
Mhm.
Ragtime is a beautiful show. Everybody go see it. Oh my God, it's maybe my favorite thing on Broadway right now. Anthony Michael Lopez was in Othello and Our Town in the same season. Also in Our Town, we had John McGinty, who is a deaf performer, and he's done numerous Broadway shows. Samuel Brewer is in Oedipus, which just closed like this weekend. And he was incredible. And then there's also an actor in Hell's Kitchen, whose name I want to make sure. Oh, I want to make sure I include him.
Jenna, you're just like me. This is what I do all day. Like,
Yeah.
for fun.
I spent like hours going down a rabbit hole where I was like, okay, let's make sure that we're talking about all of these people.
Yes, preach.
Yeah. So it was important to me that people knew that, like, not only like disabled people have always been here.
Right.
Like, literally, the first example I could find of a disabled actor on Broadway was Sarah Bernhardt. After Sarah Bernhardt had her leg amputated, she performed on Broadway.
Mhm.
And this is the 1920s. This is the very beginning of Broadway as we know it. So, like, disabled people have always been part of the narrative. And it's time that we fully embraced them and included them in that narrative and made these spaces accessible, because if there's anything that is proven by all of these incredible actors on Broadway this year, it's that we can make accommodations as long as we're building them into our budgets, as long as we are including that in our ethos as a company. We can make things accessible. We just have to, like, care.
Yes, inclusion as a whole needs to change, and I love that you're leading that change. Can you talk a little bit about ConsultAbility and your role in
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So ConsultAbility is the nonprofit that I created along with my husband. My husband, Paul, is also an access worker. He is the accessibility manager at the Performing Arts Center at the World Trade Center, PAC NYC, also called the Perlman Center for the Performing Arts. And we met working at Family. I was acting there, he
I
was stage
love it.
managing there. So we have always approached theater from this lens of, you can always make it accessible. You just have to, like, figure it out, ask some questions, figure it out. Um, and I've always come at it from the onstage side, and he's always come at it from the backstage side, because he was a stage manager and then he was a production manager. So, like, he really understands, like, how do these companies function from the, like, the side you don't see
Yeah,
as an
behind
audience
the
member.
scenes, right?
Exactly. So we founded this company. We officially got our C3 nonprofit status
Yes,
recently.
congrats.
Exciting.
Thank you. We've been running it as an LLC for a few years just because that was the easiest way for us to start and get the work going. And now we were able to finally switch to nonprofit, which is what we had always envisioned for the company. And by being nonprofit, it means that, like, theater companies can hire us to come and help them become more accessible. We do that through, like, space audits, where we walk through the space and show people, like, here's how your building is and is not serving the disabled community, and here's ways to make it more accessible, both in, like, short-term easy fixes, like, please don't have kick stops on your trash cans. That's really inaccessible. Really easy things like, hey, just take the lid off that trash can, it's fine, right? That's like a free, easy fix for everybody. But then there's also more expensive fixes like, hey, when you're able to do a renovation, here's where you could install an elevator, or here's where you could add ramps. And these might be more expensive, but you can put those into your renovation plans. You know that that's a problem now and it's something that can be fixed. So we do space audits, but we also, perhaps more importantly, do trainings where we will work with theater companies. Sometimes it means that we're working with, like, the cast and crew of a specific show. More often it means that we're working with the full company, the administrators, the directors, front of house staff, on how to be inclusive and anti-ableist in their practices. And by being a nonprofit, it means that theater companies who maybe aren't able to afford either our services or also, like, the accessibility upgrades, it can be subsidized by anybody. Anybody who wants to donate to ConsultAbility is able to do that. It can be as little as $5, but if 10 people give $5, then, like, suddenly that's $50 and a theater can afford grab bars, right? Like, there's these little things add up. So we're really happy to, like, be a nonprofit now and hopefully help theater companies all over the country to become more accessible.
Yeah. Wow. And I think more theaters need access coordinators as well. And I feel like
Mhm.
ConsultAbility works as that a little bit. I mean, I'd love
Yeah.
like an access coordinator to be in every single production, but for ConsultAbility to even just be a consultant for the theaters itself so that the experiences of not only the performers but also the creative team and then also the audience. I think people don't think
Mhm.
about like the audience experience as well.
Mhm. Yeah.
especially like you said, like backstage areas where they're considered, a private space. They're not under the ADA, or they were built before the ADA. So just things like that. The amount of theaters that, oh my God, I would send to you guys. Like I can't even tell you. And also ones that I think a lot of people wouldn't think, would need so many upgrades or stuff like that. Even like when I
Hmm.
danced at Radio City Music Hall, like, oh my God,
Hmm.
that was the experience that truly I think was so eye-opening to me of how far we've come, but also how far we have to go between the
Yeah.
rehearsal space and showing up to rehearsal and then all of a sudden not being able to actually get to the studio, in
Hmm.
Radio City Music Hall. So just stuff like that. And I think one thing we really want to talk about is access, because representation doesn't end with casting. I mean, like you said, like Broadway still struggles with physical accessibility in, these historic theaters, also like sensory access and
Hmm.
neurodivergent friendly performances. I think
Hmm.
Hamilton did one recently, which was really great to see. But I think more shows should do that. And also just
Hmm.
the economic barriers that disproportionately impact, our disability community. So
Hmm.
through consultability, you're actively working to change that. Can you talk about like why access has to be built into the process and not added later? Because I think it's often an afterthought, really.
Yeah. We view it as there's two ways to approach access. Accessibility is proactive. You are building it into the very ethos and structures of your building. You are thinking about access from the beginning. It's built into budgets, right? People don't think about like, oh my gosh, accessibility is so expensive when they're doing a renovation. It's just part of it, right? Renovations are expensive, period. Like accessibility actually isn't
Anybody who lives with
expensive.
a disability knows that.
Exactly. So,
Mhm.
like, if you're building access into that renovation, if you're building access into that set design, it's just part of it. You're not
Right.
thinking about it as like, oh my God, that ramp costs so much money. Because guess what? A staircase costs money too. So, like, pick the one that's more accessible. So, we're teaching people to build it into their budgets, to build it as like, no, this is just one of the things that it costs money to produce theater, to produce anything for that matter. But, like, yeah, there needs to be an element of inclusion from the onset. So if that's making sure that you have sensory friendly performances, that actually makes you money in the long run, because when people know that they have a space that they can come and safely watch theater, they're gonna come. Like that's an audience that you didn't have before.
Right.
So, you can build that into your budgets and into your models that like this is a new audience. This is an audience that you weren't previously reaching. That's just money you're getting. If you're looking at your renovation costs, like by having your renovation, whatever your end result is, be accessible, you're probably not even going to think about how much the ramp cost you in the end, because it's part of your renovation cost. It's just part of the expense of having a business. That's upfront accessibility. There's also reactive accommodation. Accommodation is what happens in the moments. You are thinking about, how do I make sure that this person has the access that they specifically need? Because access actually isn't universal. Every single human has their own access needs. And when you are prepared for that, accommodation is pretty easy, because you're not also thinking about the accessibility point blank for everybody. You're able to have the bandwidth to accommodate for each individual person as you meet them. So, like, when you have trained your front of house staff in accessibility, they're not scrambling, because they already, one, have thought about ways to accommodate in the moment. They already have those ideas at top of mind. But two, if your accessibility is good, you're going to have fewer accommodations on the backside, right? So you actually have the bandwidth to assist individuals who need additional accommodation beyond the accessibility that you've already laid out for every patron. And accessibility benefits every single human on the planet. We've had a number of accessibility features that are just mainstream now. Like, I don't know a single person on the planet who doesn't text at this point.
Yeah.
Like, texting was created by and for the deaf community,
Mhm.
and now we all use it. Curb cuts. Curb cuts were created for wheelchair users, and it started in the Bay Area. And curb cuts are now on every major street corner, and maybe not every single street corner should have curb cuts, but they don't. And
Mhm.
curb cuts benefit
Yeah.
every single person, from, of course, the wheelchair users to someone with a stroller, a delivery driver who's got, a dolly full of packages, just somebody who like sprained their ankle and doesn't want to step down the curb. Like curb cuts help everybody. And so it proves that accessibility benefits everybody and will continue to benefit everybody because disability is a natural part of life and aging. So if we're proactive now and we make things accessible, then everyone can continue to go about their lives as disability impacts it.
For sure. Yeah. What we love about this work is that it reframes access as part of the art, not a disruption of it. Because when you make theater accessible, you're not lowering the bar, you're expanding the audience, like you said, Jenna.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I've heard you say before, and Kelly knows I reference it all the time, is you shared a story of when you and Suffs went to the Tony Awards at Lincoln
Mm-hmm.
Center, and that there was an accessible way for you to get into the theater, but it wasn't the way that the rest of your cast was going. And
Mm-hmm.
that, is not equality. It would be
Mm-hmm.
equal if the accessible way was the way that everybody was going. Can you talk
Mm-hmm.
on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times buildings think, oh, well, we have an accessible entrance. It's just over here, so it's fine. But the problem with that is that anytime we then use that entrance further, like it makes them think that it's okay, right? And when disabled people aren't able to access a space, businesses just don't even acknowledge that sometimes. They're just like, oh, well, like if I don't see the problem, it doesn't exist. And so I tend to be the person who, all right, if your accessible entrance is, through the kitchen or through the area where you're storing trash, I'm going to point that out to you. And more often than not, what I prefer to do, because I am an ambulatory wheelchair user and because I am feisty and stubborn, I like to go through the main entrance and make everybody see it. I want everybody to know that this is not accessible. I want it pointed out to them. Like I was at a store recently that only had escalators and stairs up to like the second level. And the second level is where like all the dressing rooms were, all of the checkouts were. So like if I wanted to buy anything, I had to be upstairs. And they were using the elevator as storage. They had an elevator, but they were using it as storage.
Of course, yeah.
And so I went to security and was like, hey, I want to go upstairs. And they were like, sorry, elevator doesn't work. And I was like, okay, fine. So I stood up out of my wheelchair and carried my wheelchair up the escalator to like make a scene. And sure enough, the moment I did that, they were like, oh my God, we're so sorry. Look, here's the elevator. It's working. Right. So
Right.
like,
Suddenly it's working.
yeah. So like, I don't know how long that lasted for, that they kept the elevator working. But like every time you make a point of like, no, your secondary access isn't good enough. And I'm going to show you that.
Right.
I'm going
As you
to make a
should.
stink.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the Tony Awards, like our company management for Suffs had done everything they possibly could. They had requested accessible access. They had requested an accessible van. And the day of, it just didn't show up.
Yeah.
So, they told me like, hey, we can bring you in a separate van. Like, we can get it. It's just not going to be with everybody else, because they had requested a bus that was accessible so that everyone could be together.
Yeah.
And it didn't come. So they were like, we've got this backup option. And I was like, no, I'm going to go on the bus. And when we arrive at the Tonys, then there's going to be a video of me coming off the bus and somebody having to carry my wheelchair.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with like, it's going to be more difficult for me, but it's going to make a point. It's going to show people that this was inaccessible.
Right.
And that happens all the time. If your entrance is not accessible, if your main entrance is not accessible, then your building is not accessible.
Yeah. And I think we all have experienced that. You try everything. You try so hard. You think you're so close. And then, come day of, it just doesn't happen, So it's crazy.
Yeah. And the best laid plans are disrupted by like systemic ableism.
This is true. Yeah. I know the theme of this episode is definitely really around with access for sure. One question that just came to my mind is, what advice would you say to those that are maybe in school and interested in theater, but like their productions aren't accessible or don't feature disabled characters? I know we have had some people that are interested in they're creatives, but they are turned down and not able to perform. Would your consultability help in those instances, or is that more left up to the schools to kind of sort that out?
Yeah, ConsultAbility is there as a resource for anybody who wants it and needs it. And part of our goal at ConsultAbility is to take that onus of advocating off of the individual, because that was always my experience was, I would audition for something and they would tell me, oh, sorry, our theater isn't accessible. We can't cast you. And it was on me to then say, well, here's all the things you could do to make it accessible. Or I would be cast and they would swear it was accessible and it wasn't. Right. And then I would be in the production and having to do double time of like being an actor and also having to be an access coordinator and being, unpaid for the access coordinator position. Like, this was something I faced again and again and again. So if you have the bandwidth as an individual to show places proactively, like, here's how you can become more accessible, please do that. Whether you yourself as a disabled individual, or perhaps more importantly, non-disabled allies, that's the best thing you can do. Take that work off of your friends. Do it. Go to the local restaurant and say, hey, your building isn't accessible. Have you considered adding a ramp or removing some of these high top tables so that they're low top, or offering braille menus or digital menus? Talk to your local businesses. You probably know your friends' access needs. You might not know every access need, but you probably know your friends' access needs. And like, point that out to places to help them become more accessible. And if you then want or need additional help and resources, ConsultAbility is here. We want to help theater companies become more accessible. And that's how things are going to shift, is when it's pointed out, here's how you are inaccessible, but here's how you can fix it.
Right.
I think a lot of people get stuck at the I don't want to be yelled at stage of access, of like, I don't want to engage with this because I don't want anyone to be mad at me.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I might be a little mad at you, but I'm also going to help you fix it. I'm also going to help. In order for you to meet me where I'm at, I also have to meet you where you're at.
Right.
So we have to both be open to learning and growing and making changes for the better. No one is perfect. That's where, accessibility is not about getting a gold star. It's about being open to conversation and learning and changing and growing. And like, I have to be open to meeting you wherever you are at.
Yeah, for sure. My friend Jillian Mercado, I'm sure you know who she is.
Absolutely. Badass.
Yes, great. She always says and always reminds me that if like that when you get a job, you're there to do the job. They hired you because you have the talent, or at least they think you have the talent and skill for it. You're there to do that job. You're there to show up to set, know, your lines, or know what you're supposed to do, know your blocking, know your track, all the things. But she always says, but if you want to pay me more, I'd be happy to be a disability consultant. Like, but if you're not going to, give me a raise, then I don't expect me to show up to set every day thinking like, okay, time to now advocate for another ramp somewhere, like that kind of stuff. But I also agree with you, Jenna, of like, I'm happy to have the conversation. I'm happy to start the conversation. I'm happy to, again, meet you where you are, but it has to not just be one-sided. I would like to be met, on the other side. So that just came to mind.
And not everybody is an access coordinator.
Right.
Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody's a teacher, and it shouldn't be anybody's responsibility to be a teacher.
For sure.
It is exhausting. Yeah. And it's also not a skill set that everybody has, right? You can be an incredible disabled dancer, not do access work.
Right.
Like, that's not your job.
Yeah.
Some people have like both skill sets. Some people want to do both things, but not everyone should be expected to. And I think businesses oftentimes are like, oh, we hired a disabled person, so you tell us everything that you need for this to be accessible. And it's like, no, that's not, no one else is doing two jobs for the price of one. Like, it's absurd to expect that, but we don't value access work in that way. Like, access work should be paid. Access work is a job.
So Jenna, we always end with our one question of what's been your real power moment. So can you take us through a time where you felt empowered, or is a pivotal moment for you in your life that you felt like you had real power?
I mean, representation cannot be underestimated. The times where I have felt the most powerful were the times where I have seen myself represented. So you seen Joseph when I was 11 years old, I was like, oh my God, I can do anything. I can go be an actor. I can go be any of these professions that are being represented on stage by disabled people. Like I felt so empowered to take on the world after seeing that show when I was 11. And then I felt that way again when I saw Ali Stroker in Spring Awakening. I mean, I was a full-on adult. I was like working in regional theater, and I had never seen myself on Broadway. I had never seen someone who moved like me on Broadway. And it was this pivotal moment that made me go, "Oh my God, this is possible. This is how the world is changing." So that's my real power moment. Anytime that we really see ourselves, it breaks that glass ceiling just a little bit more.
Yeah. Whenever I see Joseph, I'm going to think of you now, Jenna. That is so funny, but I love it. Great show, for sure.
Incredible show.
Yes. As we wrap up, we want to leave listeners with this takeaway that disability representation is not charity. It's artistry, it's skill, it's discipline, it's innovation. So our call to action is this: support disabled-led productions, advocate for accessible performances in theaters, and question casting norms and creative assumptions. There are incredible disabled-led theater organizations, including consulting firm like ConsultAbility, doing the work every day, creating space and pushing the industry forward. There are also disability advocacy groups holding institutions accountable, and making sure that access is a part of the conversation and not an afterthought, like we said in the episode today. And then there are also accessible Broadway guides that I think a lot of people don't know about that help disabled audiences actually get in the room, get in the theater, from seating and captioning to sensory friendly show notes. It doesn't only live on stage as well, it also lives in policy too. I recently testified for Intro 1307, which is a New York City Council bill that would create a film, television, and theater accessibility fund to specifically support the employment and inclusion of people with disabilities in the entertainment industry, which is incredible, and it would be if we can get it passed. So it doesn't only live, in stage, but also in policy too. But I think the real question isn't whether or not disabled people belong on Broadway. So I challenge everybody, next time you go to a show, next time you see a movie, next time you are watching TV, just think like, who gets to take the stage and who's still waiting, to get on stage, or who's still waiting in the wings, so to speak. So I challenge everybody to think about that next time you go to a show. But Jenna, thank you for all your work, your time. I know you probably have a show tonight, your impact. We're just truly grateful to know you. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of mention anything else that you wanted to on the episode, or where people can find you.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to come see Wicked, I am in Wicked on Broadway at the Gershwin Theater. Come see me this year. We'd love for disabled audiences to join in this really special moment we're having. And if you want to follow me, I'm on social media, Instagram and TikTok at Bainbridge Jenna, or you can follow ConsultAbility at ConsultAbility.
Thank you, Jenna, so much. We really appreciate it and really loved chatting with you.
Thank you so much. It's been so great. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this inclusive space where disability radiates and every listen helps amplify disabled voices that deserve to be heard. We're so grateful you're on this journey with us.
We share real stories, honest conversations, and expert insights that challenge misconceptions. Because disability doesn't define us. It's just a different way of experiencing the world.
Your support keeps this beautifully disabled, slightly chaotic show rolling.
You are truly the real MVPs. We have power, real stories.